Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's roundtable. I think we're ready to kick off. So I'm going to start off and then hand over to our different speakers today. Rasmus, can you hear me well? Perfect. Wonderful. Excellent. Thanks, everyone. Welcome to today's event. I'll just do a quick introduction to the event and the background behind where it comes from and our speakers. The event is, of course, as titled, around enabling off-grid electrification through sort of off-grid systems, so rural electrification through off-grid systems. The discussion today builds off a case study written by Rasmus, who's part of our speaker cohort today. The case study is in fact part of the Climate Investment Fund's Climate Delivery Initiative. And as a very, very brief introduction, the Climate Delivery Initiative is a research program within the Climate Investment Funds. It has three different pillars. One is a research base, one is a case study series, and one is a set of workshops. So what we're doing today is a workshop as part of pillar 3 of the case of the Climate Delivery Initiative, and is building off pillar 2, which is the annual case study cohort. And the nature of the cohorts of case studies under the CDI is that rather than sort of deep dive evaluations or the sort of more shallower or more cursory monitoring and reporting, Climate Delivery Initiative case studies approach a project in cooperation with the project teams to look at challenges encountered not in project design, but rather in project delivery, in actioning the project's impact pathways. And it takes a deep dive into what the incentives and drivers and contexts were that gave rise to barriers in project delivery. And thereafter look at the incentives, drivers, and contexts that gave rise to the different solutions that were deployed. And the intention of the case studies is to pull out lessons from targeted country-specific or project-specific case studies, and then disseminate them to the wider audience in that sector or region so that we can learn from projects across similar contexts. So today's case study was the one deployed by Rasmus, and it was based on the Rwanda Renewable Energy Fund. And I'll hand over to Rasmus to discuss the case study in due course. We're joined today by Dana Rysankova. Dana, I hope I'm getting the name right. She's lead energy specialist at the World Bank. Wonderful. And she will walk through the larger context of the World Bank's engagement on off-grid energy. We will thereafter have Rasmus Heltberg present for us. He's the lead evaluation officer with IEG, and he's also the case writer for the case study in question. We also have with us Federico Cuero, who is Senior Energy Specialist and the TTL for the Rwanda Energy Fund project. We have with us Carlos Montenegro, who is from the IDB, and he will share tangential lessons from IDB's deployment of off-grid energy projects in Latin America. And we have Joanna Galan, who's part of SMAP at the World Bank as well, who's the energy access specialist who'll speak to her experience of deployment from that side. Dana, I'm going to hand over to you to speak to the broader context of off-grid. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. So this is just to give the context for the case study and why it matters, why it is important for us. Next slide, please. So starting with why energy access. So most of us, I think we know that achieving universal energy access is one of the Sustainable Development Goals. It's the goal number 7. But energy access per se really is not the objective. The objective is to provide energy access so that other objectives can be met, so that energy access is needed in order to power productive activities, to deliver social goal, for climate resilience, to enable digital transformation, for food security, for better education and health, and for improved quality of life, and also for gender equality. At the same time, if energy access is not there, it is actually quite difficult to deliver these goals. And when we look at the situation in sub-Saharan Africa, it is quite telling. For example, 2/3 of all healthcare facilities do not have reliable electricity access. And 2/3 of all primary schools have no access at all. So delivery of education and health services is difficult. In some countries, the lack of reliable access costs them up to 4% of GDP. The food security, something that's been really on our mind recently, could be tremendously enhanced if the farmers have access to cold storage, which, however, requires access to energy, and so on and so on. Next slide, please. I think there may be a delay in the slides. I still see the previous slide. Thank you. And why is energy access especially important in sub-Saharan Africa context? It is a global issue, and therefore it needs to be looked at globally as well. And it's good that we have a colleague from IDB to talk about energy access initiatives there. But when you look at where the different regions are, basically all other regions except sub-Saharan Africa are converging towards universal access, while the gap in between the other countries and sub-Saharan Africa is growing. And therefore, we need to especially accelerate access in Africa. Actually, if you look at the countries outside of sub-Saharan Africa, there's only one country in the world that has electrification rate below sub-Saharan Africa average, and that's Haiti. Now, the good news is, and you can see it both on the left and on the right, that when you look at the sub-Saharan Africa, you do see some acceleration of progress in the last 10 years, and especially in the last 5 years. So, in fact, what you see on the right side is that if sort of we continue the pace where we are right now, we are not going to achieve universal access. We will leave about 500 million people in Africa without electricity access by 2030. But if we continue the trend that we see, if we continue the curve that has started and continue turning into that curve, then universal access is actually achievable. So the question is how to do it. Next slide, please. And I think one of the difficulties and when we talk about how to expand access in sub-Saharan Africa is that the situation actually, it's a very diverse continent. So what necessarily is needed in one country is not true for others. You have countries that have actually universal access already, like Mauritius and Seychelles. You have countries that are close, like South Africa, and Kenya is getting there as well. And you have also countries that are in single digits, like South Sudan. Next slide, please. And equally, what you see is that, you know, I have showed that curve earlier about how the access is accelerated, but that acceleration really has been driven by a few countries, and it's mostly those green countries that you see here: Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and Rwanda, as well as Eswatini and Lesotho have been the countries that have been the fastest in terms of expanding access. The yellow countries are somewhere in the middle, and the brownish countries are those where really progress has to pick up. Next slide, please. Obviously, there are lots of challenges that make it difficult to expand electricity access in Africa. One of them being that it's a vast continent, and population densities in many parts of the continent are quite low. There is, of course, also tremendous affordability constraints because it's a continent that houses just a really large number of poor people. And it's the poor people that don't have access today. It's those that need to be reached, the institutional constraints and so on. But one thing that sort of is positive, and that countries that electrified, you know, 10, even 10 years ago, 20 years ago, of course, did not have, is the positive development in technology and innovation. So we all know the story of the falling cost, at least up to recently, of renewable energy, battery storage. The whole data digitization provides new opportunities, energy efficient appliances, smart digital devices, and various innovations in both how how the decentralized renewable energy systems are being put together and the financing and so on. And so as a result, what we can do today, and this is what will come strong from the Rwanda story, is that, you know, we don't have to, the countries do not have to just build the systems top down, which is the way how countries usually electrify, right? They start with their grid and then electrify the cities and then slowly grows from these cities into rural areas. But with the decentralized renewable energy technologies that these technology innovations are enabling, you can go both top down and bottom up, and therefore you can go faster. Next slide. And in fact, what we see when we did the geospatial modeling, at the continent level, what we see that about half of all connections that have to happen between now and 2030 will have to come from the decentralized renewable energy technologies. And we also see it, that this is on the right side, that the countries, and Rwanda is one of them, the countries that have electrified fastest, those green countries that I have shown earlier on the slides, are those countries that actually use the integrated approaches to electrify both with grid and off-grid. This is why the experiences on how to expand off-grid electrification become really important, because that is the way for the countries to go faster. Next slide, please. So going back like to the World Bank. So here is basically our current portfolio of all projects, and this is IDA and trust funds, and IBRD and trust funds as well. So this includes CIFs as well. So we have about 8 billion USD in the portfolio of energy access operations, and we have been able to steadily keep increasing energy access funding. But, you know, 8 billion is still a really a drop in the ocean, because based on the estimates, we need something like 20 billion a year to get, not just from the World Bank, from everyone, to get all the financing that is needed to sustainably electrify Africa. Next slide, please. And the portfolio is actually quite spread out, as you see. This is on the left where we have projects right now, and on the right are the projects that are in the pipeline. And so again, going back to Rwanda, this is why Rwanda experience is important, because it can really help deliver better projects in all these other countries. And so once basically all the portfolio is implemented, we would deliver access for 75 million people, which is about 14% of an electrified population in the eastern part of Africa, eastern and southern, and 12% in western and central. But again, you know, we need to get from 14% to somewhere more. And so next slide, please. This is the approach that we are taking. It's this holistic approach. So we help countries to set up integrated plants and platforms for electrification, and then we help them scale up both grid and off-grid access. And the third element is, and this is why this webinar and others and the case study that brings in the knowledge quickly is really important, to share the knowledge, provide technical assistance, promote institutional strengthening. But a lot of it is about helping the countries to learn from each other much quicker, because we cannot wait several years for, you know, complicated studies to happen. So it's really good to have case studies like this. Next one, please. So on the platforms, and I'm going to use Rwanda here as an example, because today in the case study, we will zoom on the off-grid part of the story. But Rwanda really is a good example of the overall electrification effort. The efforts really started a little bit over 10 years ago, when the first so-called sector-wide approach was set up, which was based on one of the first geospatial electrification plans in the continent, and it really set up the platform that followed the least cost and got all the donors, all the development partners, all the players basically on the same platform and push in the same direction. And then that really led to reduce cost and increase in the pace of electrification. So Rwanda really in something like in a little over 10 years, they went from 6% to over 60% of electrification rate. And they did it first through the grid, but soon after they realized they cannot reach all the populations by the grid, and then they integrated off-grid, and then, as we will hear today, kept on innovating. And that sort of needs to keep on innovating is really keep on adjusting, keep on seeing what works and adjusting what doesn't work is really essential for any country to achieve success. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, we are working on both fronts, on expanding the grid and expanding the off-grid. For the grid, we especially are trying to see, especially in those countries, we see there are many countries that actually have built up the networks, who have not connected many people. So large-scale densification programs to get people who are under the grid to be connected to the grid and connect those that are in near areas, but also to make sure that, you know, we don't undermine the reliability of the grid. We also invest in the upstream investments to make sure that the grid supply remains of adequate quality. And that also includes working with the utilities in the region and strengthening them. Next one, please. And on the off-grid side, it's mostly engaging with what we have seen, and again, the Rwanda story will come in, is that the private sector has the ability to deliver, but we need to find ways how to support the private sector well. And again, it would be nice to see in the Rwanda story how that public-private partnership really has been formed, because we need private sector to deliver mini grids of grid electrification. The utilities are not well suited to do so, but they cannot do it alone, and public sector support is really important. And next slide, please. And so this is where we feel that, you know, we still have a long way to go, or we still can do better as the development partners to really support this sector in a way that can really deliver on its goal, which really, when you look at the half of the connections that need to be achieved and look at the population growth that happens between now and 2030, this sector really has to deliver access for about 500 million people in Africa. And so to do so, some of you may have noticed that just a few weeks back at the COP, we have launched a DARES platform. DARES stands for Decentralized Access for Renewable Energy Scale-Up, which is a platform that is of the World Bank, IFC, MIGA, but also any other partners that are interested to join to support private sector and governments and the private sector both to deliver on the acceleration of decentralized renewable energy solutions. So mini grids, off-grid solar solutions, also standalone system for electrification of schools and health facilities, systems for farmers and for businesses as well, to deliver on the need of providing access eventually to 500 million by 2030, and our first goal is to start with 100 million by 2026. So once again, the Rwanda story is an important story that actually feeds into the design of this program as well. So I will stop here, and we'll go to the main part of this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction and setting the stage, setting the context, Dana. In fact, I really like how you put it, that about the need to learn, adapt, adjust as electrification proceeds. To some extent, the challenges that come can be predictable and unpredictable, and that projects and approaches may need to adapt. And what excites me about the Climate Delivery Initiative case studies is that they exactly study not just the design, but really focus on the execution of projects and the delivery challenges that come along the way. Maybe I should point out, and this was a thoroughly enjoyed doing this case study. I was in Rwanda in March collecting data for it, and I would really like to thank the government of Rwanda team for their support and help, as well as the World Bank team, Federico, who's here, and Arun Singh, who very much helped and support. And of course, we selected the case because of the potential to learn about off-grid expansion. When we focus on the delivery challenges, that's not to say that everything is wrong, or that the teams kind of got things wrong. It is because it's exactly in the challenges and how projects learn and adapt that there's a lot to learn. It's often easier to sort of diagnose the problems than to study how to solve them, right? So with these case studies, we really want to hone in on how teams, governments can learn and adjust projects and solve delivery challenges. This project, Rwanda Renewable Energy Fund project, or REF, is the country's largest off-grid expansion program, almost $50 million fully financed from CIF's SREP program, but implemented by the government of Rwanda through the Development Bank of Rwanda, BRD. Next slide, please. I think Dana already laid out the challenges very, very clearly. The solution here was the project aiming to accelerate access via off-grid systems, decentralized systems. It was very much baked into the design that this would promote private sector-led off-grid renewable energy, that it would provide lines of credit in local currency and create an enabling environment for off-grid market private sector-led solutions. So, and this was very much in line with government plans, both in the sector and for the country as a whole, to move toward more private sector-led development. The idea is that the project would channel the credit through these lines of credit to local financial institutions, FI financial institutions, to finance private solar companies to help them electrify households. So private solar companies are small, medium-sized firms that import solar kits, solar systems, and distribute them to households. Next slide, please. The project would very much be based, the impetus behind the project was very much the falling cost of the solar technologies, and also the better technologies around, say, digital technologies, cell phone, payment systems, digital payment systems that sort of make it easier to operate decentralized energy, receive payments, monitor consumption, things of that sort. The project design had initially 4 windows. Later on, a 5th window was added. The window one was was sort of like a line of credit to credit cooperatives for them to unlend to households and micro enterprises that wanted to borrow in order to purchase solar systems. Window 2 was unlending through banks, Rwandan banks, again to households and smaller businesses. The 3rd window was to finance mini-grid developers that wanted to set up mini-grid systems, but there has not been uptake here for reasons of low affordability. The project had expected that there would be subsidies for around mini-grids, but those sort of ceased to exist. And so despite the best of intentions, the project has not been able to finance a single mini-grid. Instead, the focus has been on solar home systems for individual households and micro businesses. There was at inception also a window 4 for direct financing of solar companies. So the firms that can be, those firms can be local, Rwandan or international, and they're the ones that import the solar systems and distribute them. This window was inactive at project inception. Later on, a fifth window was added on results-based financing for subsidies, and we'll come to that in a minute. Next slide, please. A little while after the project became active, it became clear to the teams working on this that staffing the project implementation unit proved really challenging. There were people in place, but the project wasn't sort of advancing. It became cumbersome to execute the normal project activities. The implementation was very, very slow. And a lot of work went into sort of like trying to fix that challenge, just to get the project off the ground. Execute activities that was disbursements weren't moving at all. The solution was to hire in more skills, but that proved not enough. There were some personnel changes turned out to be necessary. This might sound trivial. It might be sort of something that happens quite a lot, but we thought it was important to sort of put a bookmark here as a reminder to all teams that these things, though kind of simple or maybe not totally unexpected, can deserve attention in this kind of projects. The World Bank team worked very closely with the Rwandan Development Bank and actually instituted weekly calls as part of working closely together, troubleshooting and so on. Next slide, please. Yet, as time progressed, the project implementation sort of took off, activities were being done, but the project wasn't really moving very large funds, and it did not see the installations really kicking off. So time was, the clock was ticking here, and not much was happening. The challenge turned out to be that the financial institutions in Rwanda, they weren't really interested in financing the off-grid sector. This was not a sector that they were used to financing. It's a sector that doesn't really have much of in the way of collateral. These firms don't necessarily have land or sort of large assets they can put as collateral. That they aren't. In fact, they're small firms. So this was sort of like a new territory, and the financial institutions didn't really seem to have appetite for going into it. Even though they had these credit lines at competitive terms in local currency. Even so, the banks didn't really pick up on this in a big way in the initial years of the project. However, the project team had foreseen this problem, and they had built in designed this window 4, which would finance the Rwandan Development Bank directly. So that the Bank of Rwanda could directly provide financing to solar companies without the need for the financial institutions to intervene here. The reason that this window wasn't active in the beginning was that the government of Rwanda wanted to really build up its own domestic financial institutions and their capacity to sort of lend to the off-grid sector, because they were hoping, they wanted a sustainable way of financing the sector in the future. They would like, long after this project ends, to have a vibrant sort of financial sector that would finance electrification. But in light of the low interest, the project activated this window 4 for direct financing from the Development Bank of Rwanda. And to their credit, the World Bank team had foreseen that there could be issues here and had sort of like created a data-driven process that that would say, based on certain data, certain parameters, would lead to a review that would activate the window. So the activation didn't become like a political decision; it became a data-driven process, something that was sort of put in at the time of designing the project. It was a way to depoliticize the decisions here. Next slide, please. However, even so, with credit widely available, with the project implementation unit staffed and operating, and with great people there doing all the work, even so, the project wasn't really taking off. The pace of installing these solar home systems was really quite low still, and we're now 2-3 years into the project. A sense of maybe even 2-3 years into implementation, a sense that time is being wasted here. What are we doing? And the diagnosis became weak affordability, that the beneficiaries that the project was targeting really could not afford the solar systems. We're talking about small systems, maybe in the ballpark of 60 to 80 to maximum $100 US. But the beneficiaries here are smallholders, low incomes, irregular incomes, unpredictable incomes, and they just couldn't afford the systems. At design, this was something that the teams had discussed, were concerned about, but at the time of designing the project, there were sales. There were sales in the market. People were actually buying solar home systems. The belief is that maybe back then there were some better off groups that sort of purchased systems, but that segment kind of they got what they needed, and the project was now left with a lower income segment. Those who were not yet electrified, and they just could not afford the systems. And there's a sense that this might be the situation in many other sort of parts of the world that do rural areas not yet electrified, that there are really some affordability issues at play here. The solution was found in a very extensive sort of data-driven process with lots of consultations, lots of people inputting, very extensive process to sort of first diagnose the challenges, and second, finding out how do we design a results-based financing mechanism, a subsidy mechanism that sort of achieves the results of electrification without having too much of the wrong incentives, while targeting the poorest groups in a progressive fashion. I really want to commend the teams involved for sort of like the extensive work on this. Lots of creativity went into it. Among other things, there had been a pilot in Rwanda that had sort of piloted results-based financing in some select areas, and the team learned a lot from this pilot. Rwanda also has they have what is called the Ubudehe system, sort of like a household registry where households are categorized according to their poverty levels or income levels. The project could use the system to target the subsidies in a progressive fashion, so that the very poorest group, they receive a much larger subsidy than less poor groups, and the better off are not eligible for subsidies at all. This was put in place in 2020 at the time of project restructuring, a formal restructuring, and seemed to have done the job. Next slide, please. Installations of solar systems really kicked off once the subsidies came in place. Now, that was not the end of the project trajectory and the need to constantly sort of learn and adapt. The project was in very close touch with solar companies and financial institutions, the most relevant sort of actors in this. And via this sort of all of these contacts, all of this collection of data, the project became aware of some new challenges. First, the government lowered its off-grid target, which would result in too small a market for solar home systems. National electrification plans, they sort of undergo revision from time to time. Rwanda felt that the grid sector was evolving fast, was developing very fast, whereas the off-grid sector was not, because the project wasn't going so well in the beginning, right? And they therefore lowered the off-grid target. But that's really worrisome for the private companies, because it would result in too small a market for them. And the World Bank sort of policy dialogue with the government of Rwanda was helpful in terms of leading to an upward adjustment to the new off-grid targets, which is now around 30% of households. That still leaves like a million people or so, a million households, and plenty of people there for the project to service. There was also some revisions to the national quality standards for solar home systems that popped up and suddenly were more demanding than the international norm. Quality standards are super important in this kind of project, because otherwise you risk importing substandard solar systems that are just not up to scratch, that don't last people very long, that break down, that don't or that do not deliver what they expected to. A standard system would have around 3 lights, maybe a lantern or a torch, maybe a small radio, and usually a charging station for a phone. And you've got to have certain minimum standards. However, Rwanda's national standards suddenly had become more demanding, and a few manufacturers of solar home systems were able to meet them. The project figured this out because their data was showing that imports were slowing, and that the solar home systems, that the solar companies their stocks were running out. They just didn't have stocks of kits to supply customers. Again, there was a process of dialogue involving the World Bank, and IFC's Lighting Africa or Lighting Global initiative, and a lot of technical sort of dialogue around quality standards that resolved the issue. Next slide, please. And here are some results that sort of give a sense of how the pace of electricity connections, I guess I shouldn't call it connections, in the installations of these systems, how they sort of really accelerated thanks to the solutions put in place by the project to the delivery challenges that I outlined. Next slide, please. So what are some lessons from this? I think there's 2 kinds of lessons to take away: on adaptive management and on the more technical things. On adaptive management, meaning adjusting implementation, adjusting projects along the way. It really paid off in a major way here, and that's where the government team and the World Bank team have to be commended. They relied on extensive, continued consultations with market participants. They were monitoring the market at all times, having access to data, talking to the key players. There was also, and thanks to this, they figured out that they needed these flexible mechanisms to respond to market developments, respond to people's concerns, and the continued dialogue there between the MDBs, in this case the World Bank, and the government. This continued dialogue really helped sort of address the delivery challenges, whether they were a bit more at the level of the project or at the level of policies and regulations. It really helped that the World Bank was involved in policy dialogue because of development policy financing and for other reasons. with the government. So the World Bank was able to engage outside the project context as well on policy issues. On the more, so really not to underestimate the amount of effort that goes in from a task team to be on top of data issues. At times there were weekly calls, or other times maybe every other week's calls to really troubleshoot and stay on top of the issues. And this in addition to visits on the ground, of course. In terms of the more technical lessons, the need for multiple sources of financing comes out strongly here, and that the need for subsidies to really expand the penetration of solar home systems and mini grids, although this project, as I mentioned, didn't move mini grids in population segments with low income, low unpredictable incomes, that these subsidies are really required many times, and that results-based financing that were targeted to the poorest turned out to be a viable solution. Next slide, please. I will hand over at this point to Federico, who is one of the World Bank's co-task team leaders for the project.
Thank you, Magnus. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Excellent. So then let me start. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My name is Federico Coelho, Senior Energy Specialist at the World Bank. I'm also the task team leader for the REF project at the bank. And I had the privilege to work in the design of the REF project, plus I have been working in the implementation of the project. So I think before reflecting about the findings of the case study, I think I would prefer to share with you some context, both at the design stage, but also some of the context and challenges we faced during implementation. But I think before going there, let me congratulate Magnus and the team for preparing this case study, which I like it personally a lot because I think it reflects very well what the project went through at all the stages. And I think as well that there is a lot to learn from this project that other countries can sort of replicate and avoid falling into the same sort of issues. So let me start by just talking briefly about the context at project design. Then again, I will go and give you a bit of context at implementation, and then I will sort of reflect on some of the on the findings of the case study. So as Magnus said, and he gave a very good outline of the project, the REF was designed to increase off-grid intensive electrification with a focus of working through and with the private sector. The REF design was born as the main platform to increase off-grid electricity access in Rwanda through solar home systems and mini-grids. And the idea was that the REF would support the government efforts to achieve universal access by 2020. Again, the REF was approved in 2017. And at the time, the targets for off-grid were 48% access to off-grid electricity. But when you look at the targets, the access rates in the country back then, we were talking about 25%, and mostly grid. I think off-grid was negligible. I think there was not even a formal way to measure. So the project was born and started implementation in a stage when off-grid was a nascent sector in Rwanda, and there was not really much going on. Yeah. But when you look at the my intervention here, I would mostly focus on solar home systems more than mini grids, because I think most what we have learned under the project is coming from the solar home system interventions. So the REF was designed to address two key challenges. The first one was access to finance, and the second, affordability. And at project preparation, we were relying on information suggesting that access to finance could be addressed by extending local currency loans at competitive rates. We also relied on data confirming that people could not afford the purchase of the solar home systems, and that affordability could be addressed simply by supporting pay-go models. This is, purchasing solar home systems in installments, or by offering loans through SACCOs or commercial banks or microfinance institutions. So let me emphasize maybe three key design aspects of REF, which I think is very important. The first one is, and I think the most important is, its flexibility. You know, in the REF, funds are channeled on a first come, first served basis. As Rasmus showed, there are different financing windows, working with SACCOs, banks, mini-grid developers, or direct lending from BRD. This is how the project was designed. And the idea was to offer that flexibility to give the opportunity to the market to determine how and from where to borrow from. No funds were earmarked to any particular financing window. Again, the idea was that the market would determine if they needed the funds, and the funds would come from SACCOs, banks, or directly from BRD. The second key important design parameter was that government emphasized the importance to work and rely on existing country systems. And I'm talking here about the financial institutions. These are the SACCOs. SACCOs are a small cooperative. They have very wide coverage in the country. They have very strong relationship with the clients. So they were seen as a sustainable way to cover the off-grid lending in the future, even after the REF project closes. And second, it's banks. And the idea for banks was mostly targeting the sustainability of lending to the off-grid sector, to the companies, solar companies, again, after the project closing. However, and I think that was also mentioned before, SACCOs and banks had no previous experience in lending in this sector. So we also decided and agreed with government to have a window for offering that direct lending from BRD to the solar companies directly. And this was in case SACCOs or banks were unable to participate effectively in the project. Third important design parameter, no need for partial subsidies. This was the understanding when the project was prepared. And this was based on data that was gathered during the design of the project that did not really signal the need for providing any subsidies for purchasing the solar home system. The same data was showing that affordability could be addressed simply by working through or supporting the pay-go model, again, payment in installments, or by supporting the provision of loans from SACCOs and commercial banks. So let me move and give you a bit of context at project implementation. As I said, the off-grid sector was nascent in Rwanda, and neither the Development Bank of Rwanda, this is BRD, nor the SACCOs or banks had any previous experience lending to the off-grid sector. So it was clear from the beginning that the REF would not be one of these projects that would start showing results right away. In fact, it took about 2 years, I would say, to get the project, the REF, ready. This is having a fully staffed project implementation unit at the BRD, building capacity or minimum capacity and raise awareness across SACCOs, engaging with commercial banks, etc. Then, at the same time, the direct lending window, this was window 4 that started inactive when the project started implementation. The window was ultimately activated. A few loans were made. There were even about 30 SACCOs that had even received funds and they were ready to issue loans to the end beneficiaries. There were several banks, I think 3 to 4 banks, that had signed sort of participatory agreements with BRD and were ready to request funds in case they had any pipeline for lending to the solar companies. So everything looked very good when it comes to the status of the project, the readiness of the project. However, when you look at the results, we saw that the REF was not really making any meaningful contribution to off-grid electrification. The number of connections that were facilitated by the REF was very, very small, while at the same time we started to notice the emergence of very important challenges. And these have to do, first, the affordability concerns, which really questioned the efficacy of the pay-go model to address affordability. Second, the revision of the National Electrification Plan, which, as Rasmus said, downsized the size of the off-grid market and provided a clear signal that REC, which is the utility, started to prioritize grid expansion instead of supporting off-grid electrification, mainly because of the relatively poor performance of the off-grid sector. And I mean, nothing to blame the utility. They were just making decisions based on the performance of the off-grid sector. Third, another challenge which was sort of popping up and disrupted the sector for a while was the introduction of these national quality standards for solar home systems, which, as was stated, these standards were a bit more strict than international standards. There were issues as well with the initial implementation of these standards. And as a result, for some time, there were some disruptions in the importation of solar systems, and companies did not really have a lot of stock to provide and to continue expanding in the country. So it is in this context that the government adopted maybe or certainly the most important corrective measure to bring the project back on track. And this is the introduction of the results-based financing window. This is the window 5 that provides partial subsidies towards the purchase of the solar home systems. And the case study describes very well how sort of these challenges were addressed. So I will now move on and try to reflect on some of these key findings from the study based on my experience with the REF project in Rwanda. First one, I fully agree on the finding that the market actors should have access to multiple sources of financing. And this is especially important when none of the existing financial institutions, and these are banks and SACCOs, nor the development bank has any prior experience in the sector. Just to give an idea, in Rwanda, and this happened during project implementation, the government attempted twice during implementation of the project to limit solar companies borrowing only from commercial banks. And the argument was that banks had to be given an opportunity to engage in the off-grid sector because this would ensure the sustainability of the lending to the off-grid sector after the project has closed. Both times the decision was reversed for the same reason. And I think, again, Rasmus touched upon this one earlier. The decision was reversed because the banks were clearly not interested. They were not ready, they were not committed. We had several discussions and we heard a lot of positive, optimistic views from the banks. But when it comes to the actual appraisal or approval of any loans to the companies, the banks were doing none. And as a result, the decision to try to engage with the banks was affecting the access to finance to the companies, which was one of the reasons why the project had been designed and approved at first. So what we learned under the REF here is that you should not be prescriptive when the lending market is going through some sort of, I can call it, exploratory phase. And this exploratory phase is a phase in which the market is trying to identify who are the lenders, who are the market participants, and rather than really determining and limiting who you need to borrow from, I think it is better to be more open, to make and put all the options on the table, and then let the market decide who is actually doing any loans. And again, this is, as I said, it was tried twice. These limitations limiting the borrowing decisions in the project. And in both cases, the decision to be prescriptive did not really work. So that's on the first, I think, on the first finding. Second, I think the second finding was about the subsidies that are required to expand penetration of solar home systems in population with low income levels. On this one, I have to say that, while this is the case in Rwanda and may likely be the case in other countries, I do understand that some governments may be hesitant to subsidize solar home systems for different reasons. It could be because you don't think it is needed. And again, this was the Rwanda case 5 years ago. It could be because there is a perception in many countries that subsidies for grid connections are acceptable, whereas subsidies for off-grid connections should not be allowed. And this is sort of linked to the expectation that it is the solar companies who have to, or be the ones who should reduce the prices to affordable levels. And this, I think, is incorrect because there is a limit, and as much as companies can really reduce prices. So under the REF, what we learned is that you have to monitor the market very closely. You have to listen to the solar companies. You have to listen to other market participants. You have to look for signals that may tell you that people located far away from the grid cannot afford the purchase of solar home systems without subsidies. So in that case, you have to be ready to challenge your original mental bias that subsidies are not required. Again, this is the Rwanda case in the beginning, because affordability could be addressed through pay-go models or just offering loans through SACCOs. You have to be ready to challenge the perception that subsidies should only be given to customers who are receiving grid connections, and that customers who are located in off-grid areas and who are, by the way, citizens of the same country should be deprived from this subsidy support. I think you have to be very, very, very pragmatic. And this is what we have seen in Rwanda. In Rwanda, when these signals started to arise, we saw government going and addressing, embarking on these discussions in a very pragmatic and agile manner. I have to really commend government for taking a very, very positive approach, because government understood that if you want to reach universal access, you may need to consider providing subsidies to off-grid connections. And for your information, the REV project has averaged about 10,000 connections per month since the launch of this RBF facility, which was done in October 2020. And when you only consider the last year, the last 12 months, this number is, I think, on average about 12,000 connections per month. And again, this is a huge increase compared to how the project started. And this is a very good pace to continue electrifying the country when it comes to the off-grid areas. I have two more findings to sort of reflect on. One is on the promotion of the private sector participation that should rely on extensive and continued consultations with market participants and real-time market monitoring. So this is, I would say, extremely, extremely important for one simple reason. Government and private sector should be partners, especially when government is relying on the private sector to achieve universal access targets through off-grid electrification. As I think Dana mentioned that in her introduction remarks, governments cannot do this alone. It is really critical that governments engage and benefit from the knowledge, experience, efficiencies of the private sector. So what we have learned under the REF, I think what we learned and what we experienced under the REF is that the strength of the government-private sector partnership has been key to support the implementation of the project. This has been done through continuous interaction between government, solar companies on several issues. I think it was mentioned earlier, there was one big issue when government decided to downsize the size of the off-grid market, like reducing the number of off-grid villages. And there was a lot of consultation with companies. And as a result of that as well, government reversed the decision, did not bring back the targets to the original levels, but increased a bit the number of areas that were eligible for off-grid solar connections. The same happened as well when there were these challenges with the introduction of the quality standards for solar home systems. Again, in this case, the government as well engaged with us, with solar companies, directly also through the association. This is called the EPD, Energy Private Developers, and the issue was resolved. It took some time, but the issue was resolved. So, and finally, I think on this point, on the engagement of the government and private sector, in the case of Rwanda, this association of the energy companies, it's called EPD. The EPD is a member of the steering committee of the REF project. So the private sector has a platform to voice any concerns and as well provide any strategic guidance that can benefit the implementation of the project. So my last remark on the case findings, I think I cannot stress enough the importance to ensure and foster the continuous dialogue between the MDBs and government to address any upcoming policy and regulatory issues. This is one of the findings, I think one of the last findings in the report. And what I have to say is that MDBs are indeed very well positioned to have this dialogue with government, because we do have an engagement which is much broader than a single project. And that engagement covers also a lot of topics. So we have a very strong position, right? Because of the engagement we have in the sector, and we can apply that dialogue to address things which are, let's say, relatively minor when you look at the broad engagement. So under the ref, this dialogue was especially very important to resolve some of the issues mentioned before that were coming up during the implementation of the project. You know, I can think again on the discussions related to the off-grid areas, but I will give another example. Recently, as I mentioned earlier, the ref has gone into a very strong implementation momentum with about 12,000 connections per month. So we had discussions a few months ago with government, and we made the case to government to unlock additional areas that could be eligible for off-grid electrification. And just to put things into perspective, I mentioned earlier that the utility had made a decision that maybe prioritizing grid extension versus off-grid because off-grid was not really performing. So the discussion and the point we made to government recently was, I think you have to start considering off-grid again, because look at the performance of the REF project that is giving you 12,000 connections. And if you do not increase the size of the off-grid market, the companies who are supporting you and are your partners in these efforts may start losing interest in your country. And some of these companies, they operate in a regional level or regional sort of mode, whereby if a country has very low potential because the market gets saturated, they may start moving resources into neighboring countries. Just to make a long story short, the decision from government is yet to be given to us. We have received hints that indeed they will enable another hundreds of thousands of households for off-grid electrification, which again, it really, I think I use this example to show the importance that we have and have a strong dialogue with government to address really any issues that you face under your project because of this engagement we have, this broader engagement we have at the portfolio level. So let me stop here. Rasmus and Tim, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Fede. We'll be passing on to Carlos briefly to discuss the context from Latin America, from IDB's perspective and their engagement with off-grid projects. Carlos, the mic to you. We see comments on the chat about engaging the larger audience as well. The next two presentations will be brief, and then we will come back to a quick discussion with everyone. Please feel free to add in your questions on the chat or to open your mics in about 10 minutes or so. Thank you, Carlos, and to you.
Yeah, good morning. Could you put, please, include the presentation. Next slide, please. Well, I wanted to share some experience of the use of microgrids in Latin America for some rural electrification programs that we have. And the main objective of the use of microgrids are related in the government goals to achieve universal access of electricity. There is an important reduction in the price of photovoltaic technology, and we see most of applications using photovoltaics due to the cost reduction, and this has an important value because there is not the necessity to continue providing subsidies, which has been some of the main problems that we have in the most isolated areas that are located in Latin America. The third one is the local energy use and the creation of jobs, and that is an important opportunity that mini grids have been deployed in the region and have contributed to the creation of jobs. And also we will see an example of how mini grids strengthen the climate resilience, basically because the Caribbean and Central America are severely affected by hurricanes. Specifically in the last 2 years, more than 5 hurricanes have affected this area. And there are also good experience of reduction in environmental accidents due to the oil spills, and that is experience that we have in the Galapagos Island. Next slide, please. Just for all of you that are not so familiar with Latin America, the next one, because this has an animation, I think. Yeah, Latin America, we have 23 million inhabitants that don't have access to electricity. Let's say most of the countries, they have the electricity access more than 90%. Just Honduras and Haiti are the two countries that have the lowest electricity coverage. In Haiti, it has 45% electricity access, and Honduras 87%. But the reality of the both countries are completely different. There is big challenges right now in Haiti, and let's say almost 30% of the people that don't have electricity in America are concentrated in Haiti. And that is why IDB is putting a lot of effort together with the World Bank, using seed funds to enable the use of mini grids and increase the electricity coverage in Haiti. But we have also good experiences in Honduras with the support of Climate Investment Fund with the SREP program. We are financing the first microgrids to provide electricity in the most isolated areas, and CIF has also supported with technical cooperation to create a regulatory framework that will enable the participation of the private sector in rural electrification, but also providing strength to the national power utility to continue moving ahead with the electricity program. I will, the next slide, please. Yeah, this in this map, you can see how is distributed the necessities of providing electricity to the different areas. We have Central America, the Caribbean. You see in the Caribbean, we have almost the third part is concentrated in Haiti, because Haiti belongs to the Caribbean. Also, there is the South American region, and the main contribution comes from Colombia and Brazil, although the electricity access in this region is high, but due to the high population, they have this contribution. Next slide, please. Why it's important, the rural electrification, and we see the participation of government and the participation of the private sector. The government has an important role in the planning. We have seen, due to the presentations with the colleagues, from the former colleagues, there is important the planning. Most of the countries have developed the geospatial tools, and they are moving ahead with the objectives of reaching the universal access. But also the use of mini grids has not been so common in the region. So most of the countries are also working with small pilot programs, as I mentioned, in Honduras, in Nicaragua, in the Galapagos Islands, to increase the use of mini grids. But the government has an important role in developing tariffs, and this has enabled the participation of the private sector. We have seen in the region more interest every time from the private utilities working in isolated areas, thanks to the advances in the tariff scheme. There is also an issue of subsidies. Once mini grids have been deployed, the use of subsidies has been reduced, or in certain cases have been eliminated. It improves the quality of services. And also we have, in some cases, participation of public state-owned utilities, and the financial support for enabling the private sector, especially with incentives laws to provide tax exemptions, for instance. And in the private sector, basically in the region, they are concentrated more in the construction and operation of mini grids. There is new experiences of concession in new interested areas, for instance, in the Galapagos Island. Please continue. And we will talk about the experience that we have in Nicaragua. Nicaragua is, let's say, is a good example. In Nicaragua, the electricity access in 2007 was 56%. Right now, the electricity access in Nicaragua is 92.2%. Is one of the highest electricity access. And this has been a successful program that integrates nine international corporations working in different components, not only rural electrification, but also strengthening the transmission system. And we have here an example of one island called Corn Island. Corn Island is an island located in the Caribbean Sea. There is around 5,500 people living there. A mini grid installed. Please continue, so I will provide more details. It has an installed capacity of 2.1 megawatts and energy storage of 2.4 megawatt hours. It's integrated with a diesel genset. In the moment, this system has produced a fossil fuel saving around 50% based on the consideration that all the generation will be done with diesel. And the tariff has reduced with 30% thanks to the implementation of the mini grid. And it has a very success experience because in 2022, strong hurricanes category 4 and category 5 entered to this region and affected affected all the country, including Nicaragua and Honduras. But the mini grids were designed to support hurricanes, and you will see in the next slide, please. Yeah, this is a picture of the mini grid, of the mini grid that we have in the Corn Island. And as I explained it before, it helped to reduce the price of electricity. And the next slide, please. This shows the operation of the Corn Island is conducted by a private company, and the company has a mandate to work with women. And mostly the operators that the mini grid are operated by women. And this project has also built with the local people that work and live in Corn Island. Next slide, please. And this figure shows the climate impacts when the hurricanes ETA, you see the path of the hurricane ETA, and also there was the path of the hurricane Iota. And this hurricane severely affected the infrastructure of Central America, Nicaragua, and Honduras. But the good lesson that in the design of the mini grids, it was important to consider this resilience consideration. And I wanted to stop here because we would like to continue giving the space for the other speakers, but the importance of considering good techniques for construction will avoid the problems that we saw in other infrastructure in the region. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you, Carlos. Johanna, do we have quick thoughts from you? And then we can lead on to participant discussion.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Thanks, Madhu. Thanks, everyone. So I will make it quick because I know you all want to ask questions. I just want to offer a few thoughts on transferability of lessons learned from Rwanda. I'm coming from a bit of a bird's eye view on from the SMAP side. So there are a few lessons that I think are very transferable, and then others which might not be directly transferable. So the first transferable lessons are integrated planning is really key. It really helps to embrace different technologies, ensure that we're working with off-grid and on-grid at the same time. But it also allows us to rally behind different stakeholders, behind a shared target and goal and objective. And I think that was really the basis for the good and ongoing and continued dialogue in Rwanda between the World Bank development partners and also the private sector. So off-grid solar or distributed renewable energy is a very new market. It's nascent market, and it has seen rapid development, which is great, but it also means predicting what's going to happen is quite difficult. So that means we really need to keep a close eye on how markets are shaping and see how our interventions are actually then influencing the market development. It might be different than we had initially assumed, as we see in the case of Rwanda. So that really means we need to continue having that dialogue between the private sector and the government and the MDBs to understand how are the markets behaving, what are new barriers, and how can projects then be adapted to meet those new barriers. And that requires quite some willingness on all sides to continue this dialogue, but it also requires the capacity on all sides to have the time to invest into that dialogue and come to the table time and again. And that's something we really need to factor into the project design from the outset, so that the PIU, the project implementation unit, has the capacity to engage, but also that the World Bank team has the capacity and ability and time to continue to engage, and that we do have a capacitated private sector association that can also continue to come to the table and share the thoughts of the private sector. Another key lesson is the affordability, and I think this is a lesson that we've learned across the sector. The affordability barrier has hit us much earlier than we initially thought, still 5 years ago, and it has been compounded further by the impacts of COVID and, of course, the ongoing economic crisis. So thinking about affordability at the outset of project design is going to be really, really important for all technologies off-grid and on-grid. So these are a few lessons that are very transferable, and really that's the private sector dialogue between government, private sector, and development partner dialogue is really the key to success in any access project. But as Dana said, it's a very diverse continent, Africa, and Latin America is even more diverse. So what fits one market does not necessarily fit in other markets as well. So there's a few caveats in terms of transferability of the lessons. So as Federico clearly said, there were existing structures in Rwanda. We had a BRD that was willing to engage, that had some capacity was built to really support market development. And that's something that we don't have in each market. There aren't existing structures that we can leverage. And in that case, we will need to see what are the alternative routes through which we can actually deliver the support to the private sector. And it means some cases that we need to actually build those structures because they're not present. We also have a very strong data infrastructure in Rwanda. The data and analytics that Feder alluded to that were carried out at the project design is something that we can't even do in many markets because we simply don't know. We don't have a lot of data. We don't know about affordability levels. We don't even know about the absolute population size. We don't know exactly where they're located, and for that matter, how to reach them. We might not even have private sector actors active in those markets. And that's particularly true for those markets that in Dana's presentation were colored in brown, those that are lagging a little bit more behind. Here we just don't have a lot of information. We don't have strong capacity. So we need to come up with solutions that really fit there, and we will need to do a little bit more. We can't really only be led by data, and that also means the targeting of subsidies can't be led by data, or not be as strongly led by data as we had in the Rwanda case. And that brings some risks that I think we should all be aware of. Affordability is, of course, very important, but the moment we bring in end-user subsidies, we also bring in the risk of actually distorting a market. That risk can be mitigated if we have good targeting mechanisms, because we avoid the risk of arbitrage, we avoid the risk of leakage, we can monitor better. In the absence of that data, we need to come up with a smarter targeting or different targeting strategies and more creative targeting strategies to ensure that we are still enabling affordability, but we are not undermining an otherwise potentially viable market. So that's something that we need to be very careful about when we go about affordability issues. Yes, and then last but not least, as I already mentioned, Rwanda had a strong private sector already. There were a number of companies active. There are a number of supply chains that were already going into some more rural areas. That's something we often don't have in markets, particularly in markets where we see an FCV context. You might not have a lot of private sector actors. There might only be a handful. And that means that we need to think about the supply of products even before we can think about the stimulating the demand. So ensuring there's enough private sector attracted, there's sufficient products coming into the market before we can then really address some of the affordability constraints. And that means quite often working on the policy and regulatory environment, working on access to finance facilities that are really attractive for the private sector to come in, but also subsidies to the private sector to ensure they can actually set up shop in new markets and in difficult markets. So yeah, I know there's questions coming in through the chat, so let me just wrap up here and pass it back to you, Malu. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. And thank you all. We only have a few minutes left for discussion, and we do have questions in the chat. I'm going to open the mic really quickly to see if we have any additional questions. I'm seeing one regarding subsidies, and perhaps one of the areas we can touch on right as we kick off is the role of government, and asking our participants what their direct engagement with government has been. So our participants and our discussants, what their engagement with government has been like, and what has been government's incentives or reluctances or hesitance or challenges faced on their side in terms of one, either supporting off-grid electrification, or in terms of instituting policy actions, or in terms of instituting subsidy regimes. We can get a little bit into the granular. Are there any questions on this front from the audience? To our discussions, Dana, perhaps first to you, and then also Joanna, Fede, Carlos. Could you tell us a little bit about your engagement with government and what has been your experience in how they responded to off-grid as a potential option for electrification? Has there been heavy buy-in? Has there been sort of an openness to policies that encourage participation, etc.? And what incentives might you have used or find useful?
So I would say from my perspective, what I have seen is actually quite a big shift in the last few years, let's say in the last 5 years. And I think there are, in terms of the government's actually embracing off-grid solar solutions, both mini-grids and off-grid solar solutions. And I think there are several things that have contributed to it. One of them is what Johanna has just mentioned, and that starting point of the integrated planning. I think that is really like now also because we have better tools for planning, geospatial tools that can visualize well, right, how the country can be electrified. And when we started working with the governments on developing these plans, it has often been really an eye-opener for them, just to realize where their grid is and where the people are. And often the disconnect in between where the grid is and where the people are, and the inability, it doesn't even mean that sort of these people cannot be eventually reached by the grid. In many countries, in some countries, it's difficult because the population densities are so low, but in many countries, it is feasible. But then you can also show how long it will take to reach them. And this was sort of a wake-up call, right? Because the countries don't want to set up their goal to electrify by 2060, 2070. So if you set up the goal on electrifying by 2030 or nearby, then by definition, it is clear that you have to use both technologies. And I think that has been the sort of the first element that really has led governments to embrace these technologies. And the second one was just also seeing countries that have done it. And I have showed some of that in my presentation. The countries really that sort of are front runners in terms of the pace of electrification, that are acknowledged as the countries that are successful in terms of the electrification, are those that embrace this dual grid and off-grid approach. It's I think the starting point were countries in East Africa, so like Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda. But it has started to spread to other countries. For example, Nigeria is now going quite heavily on mini-grids and off-grid as well, and actually electrifying quite fast through these solutions. So I think that to me, those were the two factors that have led to countries increasingly embracing these technologies. Having said that, there are still challenges, but challenges often are not in them now saying we don't want these technologies. It's more about often understanding what it takes to actually implement these projects. So this is where this came out quite clearly from the Rwanda case as well, because the governments are much more accustomed to what it takes to do the grid electrification. You know, you plan, then you invest, and then you connect people. But, you know, working through private sector, developing incentives for the private sector to go and actually electrify these households is something different and something that the governments often don't have experience with. So where we see now more challenges, not so much that the governments don't want the technology, but to get them understand what it takes actually to develop these successful public-private partnerships for distributed renewable energy technologies, which just are different than sort of heavy investments in the grid expansion.
Thank you, Dana. Dana, there's a targeted question to you in the chat. I wonder if you have seen it. And I think it's close to what you have just spoken about. It's about the need to subsidize the private sector, and about whether you see buy-in from the government, etc. Would you have specific responses to that question?
Yeah, it's what I have just said. So I think it is increasingly accepted, but I think the position shouldn't be it's subsidizing of the private sector. And I think some of the speakers alluded to it. It's about providing the same level of support to the off-grid households as the grid households. It's not really that we're subsidizing private sector to give money to the private sector, right? It's channeling funding instead of from the national utilities through the private sector for the same objective. So in the end, the ones that are benefiting are the households. And I think that's sometimes, I think there are challenges still to explain this to the governments, because they feel like exactly the subsidies can go to the utilities, but not to the private sector. But it's the framing that needs to change. And I think that's when that's sort of more explained, it becomes easier. It still becomes harder. I think the government's increasingly embracing mechanisms such as results-based financing or end-user subsidies, because it is clear that how the private sector, how the households are benefiting. It's sometimes more difficult to explain that sometimes you need to put some upfront help to the companies to develop. And I think that sometimes still we find governments being reluctant to provide like upfront grants to the private sector so that they can build their distribution systems and so on. But it's it's an also evolving situation. I think we see as more and more governments embrace off-grid, they also embrace the delivery mechanisms through the private sector, and they're learning how to do it in terms of developing collaboration with the private sector.
Thank you, Dana. I know we're short on time and we're meant to close now. What I'm going to do for the purpose of time is to open the room for 1 minute for any questions or any thoughts anyone might have. And then I might pass the mic around to our speakers in order of presentation, just if you have any closing thoughts or takeaways in terms of what to think of, or your future strategies for off-grid electrification, what you're looking for, what's coming up on your radar, or in terms of your milestones looking forward, so that the room understands also where you're heading. So if anyone from the room has any questions in the next 1 minute, I think this is our last chance to speak. We do also have questions in the chat, and I'll share that with our participants, and perhaps we can respond directly. If anyone else has questions, you can also email us, and we can sort of create a link to our speakers as well, so you can collaborate. Perhaps I pass the mic around, say in reverse order. So Joanna, then Carlos, Fede, Dana, and Rasmus, perhaps, to any closing thoughts on where you're headed now and what your priorities are?
Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, I think Dana put it into the opening presentation, right? What we want to do is we really want to triple the rate at which we're delivering access as the World Bank Group and with others. And this is where a Rwanda case study is. It's really interesting to see what we can learn in terms of applying this for faster scale up in other markets. So we are really very, very focused right now on getting more activity on distributed renewables across Africa, even in the most challenging markets.
Thank you, Joanna. Carlos, over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation, and we see there are different challenges. The situations, although are in different geographic areas, but there are similar cases that we have learned from this roundtable, and we could share in our countries, in our region. And it will be a pleasure to share more details if you need more information about the project that we are doing. And I think it's good for SIF programs to see what are the main obstacles that we have and what have been our good and bad experience. And we are very pleased to share with you. Thanks a lot.
Perfect. Thank you, Carlos. Indeed, we could do a comparative study actually about what we're sharing across our project. Fede, to you, and any closing thoughts?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I'm, Carlos, happy to share much more information for anyone interested. I think the key focus for now under the REF is to do more of the same. The REF has reached a stage where it has a very strong implementation momentum. Just to give an idea, the project has connected less than 1 million customers, people in Rwanda, out of a total population of 14 million. So this is a project that really has a lot of potential to let's say, make it more efficient and to keep on really making an impact in the off-grid space. And personally, what I want to do is in Rwanda to increase the visibility of off-grid solar electricity. And as Dana said earlier, this should not stop just by providing electricity. So I think the next step is really to start working more on the productive uses and just go beyond just this simple provision of power to the people. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Fede. Rasmus, to you, please.
Yes, a plea to please continue to involve evaluators as partners in this journey of learning, growing, adapting, and figuring out what works and what needs to be adjusted. And thank you.
Thank you, Rasmus. Dana, we have heard from you. In case you have any last thoughts before we close the room, but I will also connect everyone to all our speakers so that people have a chance to collaborate.
Maybe just to say that, you know, we have 8 years to achieve universal access if we want to achieve by 2030. And we believe that off-grid decentralized renewable energy technologies really have that ability to close the gap. But we have to focus and work together. I think the collaboration really is the key in finding a way how to accelerate the collaboration across development partners, collaboration with the private sector. And that, you know, we're making a big push on sub-Saharan Africa, but I'm really glad that Carlos brought up, you know, also the importance that these technologies can play in other continents, and especially in fragile countries in other continents like Haiti that often get forgotten because they're not in Africa, but we need same push in these countries.
Perfect. Thank you, Diana. Thank you, everyone. A really big thank you to all our speakers because they're extremely because we're grateful for your time to have a discussion here. And thank you to everyone who participated. We'll send out meeting notes, the video, and all of everyone's contacts for further conversation. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.